Hello, everyone. I'm here with Congressman Ro Khanna, who represents California's 17th District. Congressman, thank you for being with me here today. First of all, how are you doing through through the crisis?
Well, Walker, I appreciate it. I appreciate a lot of your writing. I'm okay. We're fortunate. My family, young kids are okay. Our district was hard hit, but I'm very proud of our public health officials who early on sheltered in place. And we've been observing that. We have a law requiring people to wear masks. So we have managed to keep the cases and death rates fairly low. And even being a majority Asian American district, have not had incidents, significant incidents of hate or violence or incidents of conflict. So we're very proud of the community.
Well, that's good. I'm glad to hear that everybody's okay. I know this is a difficult time here in Brooklyn. It's not the best. We're still.
Yeah, are you doing okay or keeping safe? I want to make sure everyone's not okay in my district in terms of we have had a hundred some deaths and we have had people hospitalized, and of course a lot of small businesses are hurting. So I don't want to minimize the pain and the hurt, but it's been much better than it could have been because of local leadership.
Of course. So let's start with you were Bernie Sanders' national co-campaign chair for his 2020 campaign. Obviously, the campaign did not go as y'all were hoping, and I think a lot of the people watching this are disappointed about that. So I wanted to ask you, what were some of the biggest lessons that you learned from that experience?
Well, first, I'm incredibly proud of Bernie Sanders and the movement, and we came very close. I mean, I get that getting to the 10-yard line isn't good enough in a winner-take-all system, but it's a huge achievement to have someone who was a unknown senator 5 years ago, a democratic socialist, Jewish faith in his 70s, come within a whisker of becoming the Democratic nominee. And we would have won the nomination had there not been the consolidation around Biden towards post South Carolina. Now, I'm not saying that we shouldn't have anticipated it, but the point is that we, after Nevada, were in position to win the nomination.
It did look like that for a few weeks. Yeah.
I also think, I mean, obviously you never wish for crisis, but had the nomination happened a few months later and we already had the pandemic, the results may have been very different, because I think now people realize what Bernie Sanders was talking about is so obvious, that we need health care for all, that we need Medicare for all, that we need free public college, that we should be forgiving student loan debts, that we need to be increasing pay for workers doing the essential work.
It does seem that the entire agenda, I mean, right down to trade policy, right? Like we need more manufacturing here in the United States.
Yeah, and that was a big part of what I was working on with him. I mean, I've written a book about why manufacturing matters back in 2012, and part of it was that critical supplies like masks and ventilators ought to be produced here, and that creates great employment and would help revitalize so many communities left behind, not just in rural America or the heartland, but also in the African American communities. I mean, you see one of the big devastations, particularly in the Black South, was the loss of manufacturing jobs across the region, and Sanders was about bringing those jobs back. What we learned, I think, is we need to have more alliances with the African American community. I mean, I think that that's something we have to really work on as a progressive movement and build those relationships deeply, particularly in the South. There's many of those individuals, communities agree with our agenda. I mean, Jesse Jackson won that community, and he ran on single payer, and he ran on the bold proposals back in the 80s. And we have, and the polling shows that they agree with our policies, but I think that the relationships have to be formed, the organization has to be formed. Bluntly, you can't have white college kids knocking on doors in Black neighborhoods in South Carolina. I mean, we need to do better in figuring out what are the organizational techniques, how do we respect the communities, how do we listen to them. I think that's one big lesson. The second thing is I think we have to be framing our policies as not just morally just, but also as things that will actually encourage economic growth and innovation and investing in people's human capital. That if you want to succeed in the 21st century economy, we need people to be healthy, and we need them to be educated, and we need them to be well paid, and we need them
Seems reasonable.
to take care of their families. So I think the framing of policy in that way can help us get some of the quote unquote moderates or independents.
Um, so for you, does the path change then? Does 2020 change the path for the left, or is it full steam ahead? Continue trying to flip or move blue districts left and potentially put progressives in some moderate districts as well.
I think we run as many progressives as possible. That's made a big difference in the House, having new progressive voices. Justice Democrats has done an extraordinary job. And of course, some of us in Congress, it's hard to always endorse against colleagues, and sometimes we have to stay out of it. But that doesn't mean that we're not excited about a lot of progressives running. And I have said that intra-party competition is a good thing. Primaries are good and healthy for democracy. So continuing to have new progressive voices, I think, are so important. Continuing to push the vice president to adopt progressive policies. Vice President Biden is going to be critical. And just not, in my view, we shouldn't be compromising our policy positions at a time where the public is actually the most supportive of a lot of things we've stood for.
So let me ask then, are there any insurgent campaigns that you're watching or maybe excited about? Maybe not endorsements, but candidates?
Yeah. Well, there's Marie Newman won, and I had actually endorsed in that race. I was excited about that. There's a young African-American, Robert, I should get his last name, but because I'm just endorsing him in New York, African-American progressive who's running on Medicare for All and for Nita Lowey's seat. And I'm proud of supporting his efforts. And there's several other good candidates across the country. I was very excited about Carrie Eastman, who I supported in Nebraska, and her win over the traditional establishment candidate.
So what would you say then to lefties who do not feel represented by the Democratic Party anymore, who feel that this race was sort of the last straw, that the party can't be reformed? What would you say to them?
I think you have two choices. One, I think if you want to build a robust third party in this country, I don't have any problem with that. I'm not one of these people who thinks, oh, don't build third parties. I mean, you can have 4 or 5 vibrant parties and still have a very good democracy. And so to those who say, look, we want to build a third party, I say more power to you. I mean, if that's what you want to do. But I also think that there is a path to making the Democratic Party much more progressive. We almost won with Bernie Sanders. I think that bodes well for future progressives in the party to be able to get the nomination, to be able to be represented. And I think it bodes well the new members of Congress we have having such strong platforms, media platforms of the leadership post Pelosi being progressive, even to a greater degree in our leadership circle as a team. So I would say it can be both. Some people who want to work on a third party, that they should feel free to do that. And then we can collaborate on issues that we have common ground. But that you should also know that the progress is being made within the Democratic Party. It's much more progressive than when I was elected in 2016.
Now, I'm glad that you mentioned that the sort of shift of the party over the years. Do you think that the Progressive Caucus will put up a candidate for Speaker? I mean, this is assuming that if Nancy Pelosi wins her seat back, she will probably run again. Do you think that the Progressive Caucus would put somebody up against her this time?
I don't think that they would put someone up against her, partly out of practicality. I mean, she has the votes, and so that would be a tilting at windmills. But what I could see is that the progressives putting someone up to be in the top 3 spots if there was an opening, and certainly putting someone up once there's an opening, which there's going to be. And if not, who knows what the speaker's going to do in 2020, but certainly by 2022, she said she's not running again. So there is an opportunity, and I think you have people like Pramila Jayapal who would be extraordinary candidates, and other good ones too, Barbara Lee and Karen Bass. I mean, there are other great members of Congress who have progressive sympathies.
I want to talk a little bit about the HEROES Act and the relief that Democrats have put forward. I know that you and Tim Ryan are pushing for $2,000 a month
Yes.
for at least 12 months. Why is that so? Why is it so difficult to get the Democratic Party to endorse what seems to be such a simple idea?
Well, they're concerned about the cost. It would cost trillions of dollars, but my view is that we're spending trillions of dollars in terms of the Fed in providing a backstop to banks. We're spending hundreds of billions of dollars on corporations. Why not just get aid to people? And they're going to spend it, and they're going to spend that money on buying groceries. They're going to spend it on essential goods that's going to generate business, generate employment. And even if you care about deficits, I mean, Jerome Powell, who's a deficit hawk, has said borrowing money in a low interest rate, a low inflation environment, and giving it to make sure that the economy doesn't have structural unemployment is smart. And then we can debate after the pandemic. We can say, I may say, look, no, we need to do free public college. And a conservative may say, no, we should be paying down the debt. And that's a legitimate debate to have post-pandemic. But it's just irrational economically not to be borrowing money at low interest rates with low inflation during a crisis, when the consequences of that is actually going to add to our deficit. Because if unemployment increases, that's less tax revenue, and deficits are going to get worse. So even if your goal is reducing deficits, you should be for the types of spendings Tim Ryan and I are talking about.
Yeah, I looked through the HEROES Act, admittedly not all the way through it. It's 1,800 pages long. But some of the things that are in that, like the rent relief, is heavily means tested. And it does seem that when it comes to aid for working people or small businesses or what have you, the aid is generally very means tested. But when it comes to a company like maybe Boeing that needs a bailout, the money is always there, and it's never really an issue. You're somebody who is fighting, I think, for more on the side of the working people. So what do you need as an elected progressive? What do you need from activists and organizers on the ground so that you can actually get the things that you are fighting for through? And do you think that you can get them?
Yeah, I need more colleagues. I need more progressives, colleagues in Congress. I need ultimately we were trying for a progressive nominee. That makes all the difference. Right? Who the president of the United States is, or who represents the party in the presidency, makes an incredible difference. And if Bernie Sanders were the nominee, it would have been a different world. But we need the movement to continue. We need the movement not to get discouraged. We need the movement to say, look, there are a lot of good progressives. I'd say at least a dozen in Congress who are pushing and fighting for this. And how do we build so that 2024, 2028 are years where we can finally get the agenda enacted? That has to be our priority. But I think, and we have to make sure we're not compromising on these basic ideas of Medicare for all, free public college, $15 minimum wage, stronger collective bargaining, forgiving student loan debt, bold climate change policies. We have to be clear and stand firm on these. I think the compromise on principle is something that is not healthy.
So I would ask then, what leverage progressives in Congress have if they end up ultimately voting for these measures like the HEROES Act, which does provisions that would lift the SALT cap for charitable donations, which is a move that is widely seen as to benefit wealthy philanthropists. It would potentially cut pensions for essential workers, and it would also, I mean, obviously it did not include monthly aid or a rent freeze or any of the things that progressives are really
Right.
fighting for. So what leverage do elected progressives have if they vote for uh, packages like that?
Well, it's a challenge. 9 of us voted against the rule, which said, look, let's get, and I was to say, let's delay it so that we can get some more of our priorities in. And I think those 9 are sort of the core progressive caucus in the House. Uh, and then Pramila Jayapal was, I think, the only one who voted against the actual bill.
Mm-hmm.
And the challenge of voting against the bill is that, we all have districts that are hurting, and $1 trillion of aid in my district would mean less teachers getting laid off and had less education cuts. And so I think the squad and a lot of us felt that our districts were so hard hit, our states were so hard hit, we didn't want to see further layoffs, we didn't want to see further cuts, and we weren't willing to tank the bill given that aid. So the question is, well, how do you go forward? And I think this is where, I mean, progressives and leadership are important, because you could have had the same sense of a bill for moderates and made it a hard vote for moderates, where you could have said to a moderate member, are you really going to vote against $1 trillion going to your district or over the fact that we have Medicare expansion or we have a monthly check? And it's leadership that decides how to package these so that when you have something that most members can't vote against, such as aid to their districts in crises, what do you attach to it? And that is the leadership's decision. They're the only ones who get to decide what comes to the floor. So the long-term solution for progressives is really to have people in leadership that are pushing to package these things in ways that link popular policies to progressive goals.
So then, if Pelosi remains Speaker, that would seem to not help your cause. I mean, Pelosi has been a vocal critic of Medicare for All and a lot of these progressive agenda items that you speak so eloquently about. Do you? I
Well,
mean,
the alternative, it would be Steny Hoyer. I mean, he's not going to get anything done. And so the question is, well, how do you get a Pramila Jayapal or a Karen Bass or a Barbara Lee in the leadership team? And I think the way you do that is getting more progressives elected to Congress, right? I mean, so the replacement, Ayanna Pressley, and I think she ran against Capitano or whoever, and her beating him, that added a progressive voice. That makes it one vote added to the progressive column. When AOC did that, that added a progressive voice. So the question is, how many progressives can we get so that we really have leverage to get one of our people elected to that leadership team?
so then, do you see yourself making more endorsements this cycle of insurgent?
I do. I've endorsed in the Chicago with Marie Newman. I endorsed with Kara Eastman. I've just endorsed in Nita Lowey's seat that's going to be out on Tuesday. And people should tweet.
But beyond this upcoming round, I mean.
Yes, and should let me know who they see out there as progressive candidates. When I'm in touch with Justice Democrats, they often send me good candidates, and progressive committee for campaign change, I'm in touch with them. But if people have ideas of who's out there, who's running, they should let me know. I mean, I'm not saying this to duck the issue, but endorsements rarely matter from other members of Congress. So what matters most is building grassroots organization in communities. I mean, I think I was the only one to endorse AOC, and that was a dual endorsement. And that may have mattered given that I was, did it at the right time. And
it did draw attention to it. Undeniably drew attention.
But ultimately she won, not because she won despite everyone else not having endorsed her or endorsed Crowley, and because she did the organizing on the ground.
It's that is very true. I did want to ask some of the questions that my followers sent. One person asks if you have any plans to run for Senate primary against Kamala Harris or Dianne Feinstein.
No, I love my district. I love representing Silicon Valley because so much of our challenges are how do we marry an embrace of innovation with a strong political egalitarian political ideology. And I think that the challenges of our time is that the tech economy has created gains that have been so disproportionate to the executives and shareholders, and a lot of the workers have been left out. A lot of rural communities have been left out. A lot of minority communities have been left out. A lot of women have been left out. And I see myself as being able to embrace innovation, but democratize it and spread it, and love doing that work. And so I feel like I'm suited for the district I represent.
And then how do you, somebody else asks, what are congressional progressives going to do if Nancy Pelosi keeps stonewalling legislation? I mean,
Well, we're going to draw, the fact that 9 of us were willing to endure leadership's displeasure and vote against the rule. I mean, that's rarely done, that you vote against the rule of your own party. Shows that we will cast votes against leadership. And people often think, oh, did we cower to leadership? That wasn't the issue. The issue was we weren't willing to cast votes against our own states and districts, ultimately for aid. But I think you will see a progressive bloc that is willing to push on social media and push for policies that we believe are right. And Medicare for All is right at top of the list. I mean, we have a healthcare crisis. We ought to have a healthcare response.
So the Freedom Caucus is obviously not enormous. The Progressive Caucus is far bigger. And yet the Freedom Caucus seemed very effective at pushing its leadership in certain directions. Are there any lessons that you could take, that elected progressives could take from the model?
Well, it's misleading to look at the Progressive Caucus's numbers because, like I said, there were 9 of us ultimately who were willing to vote against the rule. So there are 92 people who like to be part of the caucus because they like the label progressive, but that doesn't mean that they're going to act in concert. You probably have maybe 15 people willing to act in concert. And then you have the added sense that progressives believe in governance. So we're not just willing to blow the place up when it means hurting our communities. But given that, I think the key is, how do we have that kernel of 15, 20 people have greater leverage in being on the right committees, being in the negotiations. And of course, we can do better. I mean, we've had some wins, but we can do better on
that. And then somewhat unrelated, but do you support joining the International Criminal Court?
I'd have to look at that. I mean, I certainly think that we ought to look to participate in International Criminal Court decisions where they are relevant. But I wouldn't see, if the International Criminal Court wants to have start trying for Barack Obama or something, I mean, I don't support that. So I think it has to be a nuanced question.
And then my last question for you is, I expect that this sentiment is probably shared by a lot of people who will watch this, but how can I trust a party that is still running someone who voted for the Iraq War? You've been a very outspoken.
Well, yeah, no, I mean, of course, I started my career against the Iraq War. I ran in a primary challenge to Tom Lantos because he had voted in the Iraq War. Nation magazine has a whole article. I was the first anti-Iraq war candidate in the country when I challenged him. So for the House of Representatives. So I get it. We had a primary, and we fought very, very hard on those issues, and Biden won. So that just shows me that we have work to do as a progressive movement. We came very close, and I guess what I would say is, look how close Bernie Sanders came. Why aren't we building to make sure a progressive wins in 24? We've shown it's possible. So instead of taking the opposite reaction, I mean, I lost twice for Congress before I won, and I said, okay, how do I build? And then I built and finally won. And so I think progressives should say 20 was better than 16. In 24, 28, we're going to win.
All right. Well, Congressman, thank you so much for taking the time. I know that you're very busy. I hope that you'll come back and we can have another one of these talks. And
I always appreciate it. I appreciate your writing. Appreciate your in the Twitter sphere, and you're a true progressive voice, and appreciate that.
Stay healthy.
Thank you.
I'm going to end the recording.